The quiet descent of the spacecraft onto the dusty surface was almost surreal. As the hatch slowly opened, the silence that greeted Aaron felt thick, almost oppressive. The stars above were distant and dim, as if they no longer had any connection to this forgotten corner of the universe. As his feet touched the planet's soil, there was no need for the protective suit he had anticipated. He could feel the ground beneath him, cold, foreign, but undeniably real. Breathing deeply, he realized the air was surprisingly breathable. It filled his lungs in a way that felt strange, yet familiar. All the predictions, all the scientific data they had gathered had indicated that this planet was unsuitable for human life. Yet here he was, breathing its air without any hindrance, feeling the planet beneath his skin. Aaron had come here as an astronaut, but the reality before him seemed to stretch far beyond his training. The air around him hummed with a strange sense of stillness, broken only by the distant movement of figures emerging from the horizon. He squinted, watching as they drew closer, figures clad in worn garments, their faces hidden under layers of dust. As they approached, there was no fear in their eyes, no hesitation, only a quiet curiosity. The people, or whatever they were, seemed as ancient as the land itself, weathered and weary. Their eyes held a question, though their lips remained silent. Aaron took a step forward, and then another, the sound of his boots crunching against the ground the only noise in the vast emptiness. He tried to speak, but something told him that words were unnecessary. The way they looked at him, it was as if they were seeing something more than a man. It wasn't long before he realized the truth. In their eyes, he was not just an outsider. He was something divine, a being beyond their comprehension. A god. The days passed slowly, marked by the rising and setting of a dim sun. Aaron had tried, at first, to communicate with the people, to explain that he was not a god, not some divine being descended from the stars. But every attempt was met with blank stares and reverent bows. His words, though spoken in the clearest voice he could muster, seemed to dissolve into the air, lost in translation. The people, there were only a few dozen of them, lived in crude, weathered shelters made of materials scavenged from the barren land. Despite their primitive surroundings, there was something almost serene about their way of life. They moved with purpose but without haste, their faces calm, as if they had accepted the harshness of the world long ago. Aaron couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. These people treated him with a reverence that bordered on worship. Every action he took was watched closely, every word he uttered hung in the air like a command from the heavens. They brought him food, strange, tasteless plants they harvested from the dry soil, and water from underground springs, as if ensuring his survival was their highest duty. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Aaron sat by a small fire, gazing out at the desolate landscape. His mind raced with questions. How had he ended up here? What had caused his landing pod to malfunction and bring him to this forgotten world? And most troubling of all, why did these people see him as something divine? As he stared into the flames, a figure approached quietly from the shadows. It was one of the elders, a man with deep lines etched into his face, his eyes sharp yet kind. The elder knelt before Aaron, his head bowed low in a gesture of submission. "You don't have to do that," Aaron said, though he knew the man would not understand his words. He reached out, placing a hand on the elder's shoulder, hoping the gesture would convey his meaning. The elder looked up, his expression one of awe. Then, slowly, he reached into the folds of his worn clothing and produced a small, intricately carved stone. He placed it in Aaron's hands, as if offering a gift. The stone was smooth to the touch, yet its carvings told a story, an ancient tale of gods who descended from the skies to bring life and wisdom to the people. Aaron's breath caught in his throat as he realized the significance of the stone. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. These people had been waiting for him, or someone like him, for generations. He wasn't just an astronaut to them. He was their god. Aaron felt the weight of the stone in his hand, the intricate carvings running along its surface like a cryptic message from the past. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into a role he never asked for. This was not just a misunderstanding, these people truly believed he was sent by the gods. Days turned into weeks, and the reverence around him only grew stronger. Wherever he walked, they followed, their heads bowed, their eyes filled with silent hope. Aaron felt a growing sense of responsibility, a pressure to live up to the expectations they had placed on him. But how could he lead them when he didn't understand their language, their culture, or even how they survived in such a barren place? He tried again to explain to them that he was just a man, but every time he spoke, their eyes would shine with belief, as if his very words were divine proclamations. It was becoming harder to separate himself from the role they had cast him in. One morning, while he sat outside one of the makeshift shelters, a small group of villagers gathered before him. They brought with them offerings, fruits from the strange plants that grew in the cracks of the earth, woven garments, and clay pots filled with water. It was clear that they had nothing to spare, and yet they gave it all to him, expecting nothing in return except his presence. Aaron stood up, shaking his head. "No, I don't need these things," he said, his voice carrying a hint of frustration. He waved his hands, trying to push the offerings back toward them. But the people only smiled and nodded, as if their God was simply too humble to accept their gifts. As the group dispersed, leaving the offerings behind, Aaron felt a deep sense of conflict stir within him. He had never imagined that survival on a distant world would involve the worship of an entire people. And yet, every action he took, no matter how small, seemed to affirm their belief that he was something more than human. Later that day, one of the younger villagers approached him, a girl no older than 10. She stared up at him with wide, curious eyes, holding out a small wooden carving, a crude figure resembling him, with exaggerated features and a shining halo above its head. Aaron knelt down, taking the carving from her small hands. He looked at the figure for a long moment, his mind reeling with the implications. They were immortalizing him, turning him into the very thing he feared, a god in their eyes. "I'm not what you think I am," Aaron said softly, his voice breaking. But the girl only smiled and ran off, leaving him alone with his thoughts. As the night fell and the stars emerged one by one in the sky, Aaron lay on the hard ground, staring up at the vastness of the universe. He had come to this planet as an explorer, a scientist, a man. Now, he wasn't sure what he was anymore. As the days stretched into months, Aaron found himself growing accustomed to the strange rhythms of this new life. The people, his people now, as they had begun calling themselves, continued to revere him, and he had, reluctantly, accepted their devotion. Yet each time they looked at him with awe, he felt the sting of his own inadequacy. He was not the god they believed him to be, but he feared that revealing the truth would shatter the fragile peace that had settled over the community. One evening, as Aaron walked along the outskirts of the village, he noticed a commotion. The villagers had gathered around a man who was lying motionless on the ground. His skin was pale, his breath shallow, and the villagers whispered among themselves in hushed tones. Aaron approached cautiously, kneeling beside the man. The villagers, seeing their god approach, parted the way for him. Their eyes were filled with hope, as if they expected a miracle. "He is sick," Aaron muttered to himself, examining the man's symptoms. Feverish, weak, whatever illness had taken hold of him was beyond Aaron's knowledge. He had no medical supplies, no tools to help him treat the sick man. Yet the villagers, desperate for his intervention, stood in silent reverence, waiting for him to act. For the first time since arriving on this planet, Aaron felt truly helpless. "I'm not a healer," he whispered, but the villagers continued to watch him, expecting the impossible. He placed his hand on the sick man's forehead, feeling the intense heat radiating from his body. Aaron closed his eyes, not knowing what else to do. He muttered a quiet prayer, not to any god, but to the universe itself, hoping that somehow, against all odds, the man would recover. When he opened his eyes, the villagers were still there, watching in awe. They believed that Aaron's touch alone was enough to heal the man. The pressure of their belief weighed heavily on his shoulders. That night, Aaron sat by the sick man's side, watching over him as he slept fitfully. The village was quiet, the only sounds were the distant rustle of the wind and the occasional murmurs from the villagers. Aaron's mind raced. What if the man didn't recover? Would the people see him as a false god? Would their faith be shaken? He couldn't bear the thought of failing them. But as the hours passed, something remarkable happened. The man's fever began to break. By dawn, his breathing had steadied, and though he was still weak, it was clear that he would survive. The villagers, upon seeing this, fell to their knees, chanting softly, their belief in Aaron now unshakable. Aaron, however, felt no relief. He hadn't cured the man, he had merely watched as nature took its course. But the people didn't care about the truth. To them, it was a miracle, and Aaron was their savior. He stood there, looking out over the sea of worshipping faces, and realized that his role as a god was no longer something he could escape. Whether he liked it or not, he had become the very thing he had feared, a symbol of hope, a divine figure in their eyes. But deep down, Aaron knew that this illusion couldn't last forever. The village thrived under Aaron's reluctant guidance. The crops were growing better than ever before, the people seemed healthier, and there was a quiet, peaceful rhythm to their lives. Aaron had become a fixture in the community, a god among men. Despite his internal struggle, he had found a strange solace in their devotion. Yet, something gnawed at him. The weight of the lie he was living grew heavier with each passing day. It wasn't just the pressure of their reverence, it was something deeper. A feeling that he was missing a vital piece of the puzzle. Every night, as the stars blinked overhead, Aaron would gaze up, feeling a cold unease settle over him. Why had he ended up here? What had gone wrong with his mission? And why did this place, this desolate world, feel both foreign and unnervingly familiar? One fateful night, Aaron decided to search for answers. He wandered beyond the village limits, deeper into the barren landscape, determined to uncover whatever truth lay hidden in this world. As he walked, the air grew colder, the winds harsher, and the land more desolate. After hours of walking, he stumbled upon something half buried in the dust, a metal structure, aged and corroded, but unmistakably of human origin. His heart raced as he dug through the sand and unearthed the remnants of what appeared to be a long-forgotten spacecraft. It was not his own, yet it bore the same insignia as the mission he had embarked on. His mind raced, was he not the first to land on this world? Had others come before him? Pushing through the wreckage, Aaron found a small terminal, miraculously still functional, though its screen flickered weakly. With trembling hands, he activated it. Data scrolled across the screen: mission logs, coordinates, entries from other astronauts. As he read, the horrifying truth unfolded before him. This planet wasn't some random, distant world. It was Earth. Or rather, what was left of it. Centuries had passed since the world Aaron once knew had fallen into ruin. The people who now worshipped him were the descendants of those who had survived the collapse, living in the shadow of a forgotten age. The technological remnants of humanity had been reduced to myth, and in their desperation, they had turned to him, a lone survivor from a different time, for salvation. His stomach churned as the realization hit him like a tidal wave. He had thought he was on a distant, alien world. But this was his home, a world that had long since decayed into a wasteland. And the people who revered him? They were the final echoes of humanity, clinging to a past they no longer remembered. Aaron stumbled back from the wreckage, his mind in turmoil. He wasn't their god. He was just a man, a relic from a time long gone. The people he had been trying to lead were all that remained of the civilization he once belonged to. As the full weight of the revelation settled over him, a deep and terrible silence followed. He looked back toward the village, where the people still believed in him, still looked to him as their savior. But now he knew the truth: he couldn't save them. He couldn't even save himself.